As New Year's Day approaches each year, the Washington Post publishes its list, what's in and what is out. Since 1977, what's in and what is out has placed people, things, ideas, and even places as either on the in column, meaning they're recommended, popular, or fun, or in the out column, meaning they're none of those things. For 2014, they told us that ferns are the in plant and succulent plants are out. We are warned that we should really avoid exposed brick when we are decorating, but to run and get those brass fixtures you've had your eye on. Beyonce is somehow both in and out. I don't know that one. But Brussels sprouts are out, which is good news to me. But cauliflower is in, which is not so much good news to me. Apparently advocating for the statehood of Washington, D.C. is now out, while looking for sovereignty for the Arctic, and yes, even Santa Claus' house, is apparently the in cause. And for the car aficionados among you, excuse me, Teslas are listed as being out, and GM and General Motors cars are listed as being in for 2014. That might be one they want to revise now that we're mid-year. These lists are mostly for fun, and we know they rest on the opinion of the person putting them together. Still, they reflect our human tendency to want to make judgments of what is in and what is out. For just like the Post's own list, people often characterizes people, places, ideas as part of the in group that should be welcome and enjoyed, or part of the out group that should be avoided. But unlike the Washington Post's list, such categorizations are often used to bolster one group or another, justifying prejudices, discrimination, or oppression. And it would appear from today's gospel reading that even Jesus himself is not immune to this tendency. Did Jesus get out of the wrong side of the bed that morning? First, he chastised the Pharisees for the barriers they have constructed among the Jewish people, using rather crude bodily functions to emphasize his point. And in Greek, it is very crude. Then, after leaving Jewish territory and going into someone else's land, he speaks harshly to a Canaanite woman who's only pleading for help for her daughter. These verses could almost be titled in the manner of the popular children's book and called Jesus and the Terrible, Horrible, No Good, Very Bad Day. Now, many a preacher has struggled to explain Jesus' actions here. Some try to justify it by saying Jesus is trying to highlight his disciples' prejudices by giving a living example of what he was just talking about. Many say that Jesus was testing the woman, testing her faith and her sincerity, that she really did believe that he was the son of David and wasn't just looking for anyone who would help her. And some say this just highlights Jesus' humanness and speculate that Jesus, after all his ministry, was getting tired. And then there are those who propose that God used this woman to teach Jesus, that his call went far beyond what Jesus was currently doing. Now this morning, I'm not going to attempt to explain this away. I'm going to allow the harshness of what Jesus' initial reaction is to stand without attempting to resolve it or the motive behind it any more than the story itself does. For our gut reaction is to try to explain Jesus' reaction away. His behavior here is just plain ugly. Really, Jesus, are you calling this woman and her daughter female dogs? His words would be right at home in the mouth of Archie Bunker or a neo-Nazi. But Jesus? Coming immediately after telling the Pharisees that one's intentions and actions towards others is what matters to God, it only highlights the harshness, the ugliness of how this is so not like Jesus. In fact, they seem even harsher coming out of his mouth than they would have if one of his disciples or someone else had said it. Yet the woman persists. She refuses to let Jesus dismiss her or her daughter's needs based on her nationality. More deeply, she refuses to allow Jesus to dismiss her humanity. If they are no better than dogs in his mind, then he will at least give them the scraps that he would give to a dog. They deserve at least that. Instead of accepting his rejection of her and her kind, she throws it back at him, claiming her right to be at God's table of forgiveness and grace. She demands her place at the table on that in list, no matter what others say. Jesus' initial reaction shouldn't sound harsher than if anyone else had said it. The reality is that it should sound just as harsh coming out of anyone else's mouth. It should sound just as harsh and unexpected as when the disciples urge Jesus to send the woman away because she's shouting after them. It should sound just as out of place and demeaning when anyone today refers to another as those people or any other label that puts them as somehow part of some blob that we can dismiss as less than human because they don't look or act or talk like us. Whereas Jesus earlier told the disciples and the Pharisees, the words we use, the way we describe others and talk to them and about them have real life-changing consequences. I wish we could abolish forever that saying, sticks and stones will break my bones, but names will never hurt me, and get rid of it as the absurd lie that it really is. Anyone who's been teased or bullied knows better. Anyone who's been in an argument that has deteriorated into name-calling or things that we wish we hadn't said know the real-life effects on the relationship later on of those very words. And we only need look back as far as the Holocaust in Nazi Germany or the lynchings of blacks in the 20th century in our own country to know that how we talk to people and how we talk about people over time eventually shapes how others see them. And for some, will give them the context and the permission to abuse, oppress, and even kill whole groups of people that they have defined as being out. It doesn't matter if those actions have resulted from a hate that makes it so that they can only see the other person as non-human, as demonizing who they are, and putting them into a class of people who don't deserve to be treated any better. It doesn't matter if it comes from a fear that has been born from hearing the other called a threat to the in crowd for so long that all the other person can see is peril and danger and not another human being. The words we use, the things we say about others join with what others say and form a context, an environment that affects not only our behaviors, but the behaviors of others. Those words and names that we tolerate, those descriptions of others as less than human that we ignore as ignorant instead of countering them, and those debates that we engage in that talk about all the fill in your blank poison the atmosphere that we all live in. Deriding the motives of whoever is on the out, whoever is the other. Demonizing another person as having only evil or unclean intents are all part of making lists of who is in and who is out. And eventually, those lists start to construct a warped reality. That child with a different language isn't a human being, but an illegal who we need to expel. That group over there with a different skin color or a different way of talking, we have to watch them more carefully than others, for they are thugs and extremists, terrorists, just walking time bombs ready to explode and harm us. The result is evident wherever you get your news from. Bombs exchanged between Palestine and Israel, sectarian violence and genocides in places such as Syria, Iraq, and the Sudan, killing in our own streets, and a prison system that at least appears to favor one skin color over another. Who's in and who's out fuels much of the injustice and violence in our world. Now, there's a story from Hasidic tradition of a rabbi who gathers his students together one day before sunrise, while it's still quite dark. Once they're assembled, he asks them, "How can you tell when night has ended and the day has begun?" One student thinks about it and tries, "Could it be when you see an animal and can tell whether it's a sheep or a goat?" "No," replies the rabbi. Another student tries, "Could it be when you look at a tree and can see the difference between whether it's a fig tree or a peach tree?" And again, the rabbi answers, "No, that's not it." After a few more guesses, the students ask, "Well, how do you tell night has ended?" The rabbi answered, "It's when you can look at the face of any man or woman and see that they are your brother or your sister. If you cannot do this, no matter what time it is still night." We are witnessing in Ferguson, Missouri, the tragic results of our inability to recognize others as our brothers and sisters. Since last Saturday, peaceful protests as well as looting and violent clashes between police and crowds have been sparked by the shooting of an armed African-American young man by a police officer there. Whether the parties involved in this matter are in or out to you, whether they're in and the good guys or out and part of the problem, often depends on the source. Yet what we are hearing and witnessing in Ferguson isn't isolated to this one event or even to this one town. The complexity of the issues at the root of these events stem from our inability to end the night that keeps us from seeing each person as our brother and sister. This is evident in the reaction to the events. Efforts to quickly judge and ascribe simple, sweeping motives to any side involved. They're either thugs and thieves or military wannabes and racists. Each side is seeking out anything they can find to use as proof, to prove that they are in and the other side is out. What do you see? What do you see when you see Mike Brown in the pictures, or the crowds who have gathered, or the police in Ferguson? Do you see only caricatures and demonizations? Or is there enough daylight for you to see all of them, as our brothers and sisters? I want to encourage us to not explain away the current crisis in Ferguson, Missouri, or push it to the back of our collective memory when the next news cycle brings up the next story we should be paying attention to. Too many people in the media and out of it are rushing to either condemn this officer as evil or blame Brown for causing the officer to shoot him, each trying to determine who is on the right side of this. I hope that we can sit with it, see the repercussions that go far beyond Ferguson and started long before a week ago Saturday. I pray we start to understand how building the list of who's in and out is part of the complex underlying issues that led to this event and will continue to lead to similar tragic events for all who are involved in them if we don't address it. I pray that we recognize that the ways that we have that inability to look in the face of another and see them as a brother or a sister is part of the problem. That human tendency that we have that wants to put the African American man as a threat to the police, or the police as looking only to harass and arrest you, is part of what leads to this sort of violence. And I pray we finally comprehend that by constructing those lists of those who are in and those who are out, using such titles, we very rarely use in and out. We use things such as good and evil, safe and threats to our ways of life. That all these ways lead to the words that should sound just as harsh coming out of our mouths and the mouths of others as Jesus referring to this woman as a dog. They lead to those actions that should become as appalling to us as witnessing Jesus' initial refusal to help this woman. And if we can do that, if we can sit with it and look for the daylight, then maybe, just maybe, we could work for a time when day is always breaking and night never comes, for we can all see each other as brothers and sisters, children of God's joyful and diverse family. Amen. As many of you know, Pastor John and I plan out our sermon titles and our passages that we will preach on weeks and sometimes months in advance. And so was the case with today's reading. I picked that over a month ago, before any of the events happened in Ferguson, before the bombs started flying between Palestine and Gaza, and between many of the places that we have read recently. Because the reality is that it isn't just these places that we can ignore or say, thank goodness it's there and not here, wherever here is. When I was in seminary, I think I've shared this story with some of you, was during the height of the Kosovo War, when Muslim refugees were fleeing because they were being targeted, especially by the Serbs. And as we met as a seminary community, as the students, we wondered what we could do. First thing that we did was we did a benefit for the refugees themselves. We raised money. But we ended the benefit with a service in our seminary chapel, where we all got together and each brought a part of what we hoped for peace and where we found our faith in it. I was telling our soloist today that I don't like singing in front of people. I have no problem talking, but singing is hard by myself. When I'm with a choir, it's real easy. I can blend in. But that day I chose to use words that seem appropriate today, and that I hope we remember every time we see something like this that come from the civil rights movement. We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome someday. Oh, deep in my soul, I do believe we shall overcome someday. We will live in peace. We will live in peace. We will live in peace someday. Oh, deep in my soul, I do believe that we shall live in peace someday. May it begin today.